Hello, genealogists. This is Craig, and this is Just Genealogy. And today, believe it or not, we are going to talk about mastering genealogical proof. So if we go to mastering genealogical proof and we look and see what it says, what we're dealing with is analysis and comparison, or correlation, of the relevant sources and information to assess their usefulness as evidence of the research question's answer. And that's what it says in the Genealogical Proof Standard book. And in the Genealogy Standards, it says in Chapter 1 of the Genealogical Standards, 2nd edition, revised, please remember that I'm only speaking for myself and I'm not speaking for the Board for Certification of Genealogists, and that anything I might say is my personal opinion and not the opinion of the board. Test. Through the process of analysis and correlation of all sources, information, items, and evidence contributing to an answer to a genealogical question or problem. So those are the pieces. And we can add to that by saying analysis and correlation test genealogical evidence. Analysis shows that the conclusion rests on the most likely accurate sources available. Correlation shows that the proof reflects what combined relevant evidence shows. Together, analysis and correlation show that a conclusion is unbiased. Okay, so let's talk about that for a while. So basically what we're doing here in this piece of the Genealogical Proof Standard is dividing it into two pieces: analysis and correlation. And that's what we have here in the books, in the words. But my view of this is that actually it's three pieces. There is analysis, there's correlation, and then there's analysis. And what I mean by that is that in the beginning of this analysis, we are looking at a single record. Then, having made judgments about that single record, we are then comparing it to other records. And then, having done that comparison, that correlation between those records, we are then doing further analysis. So for me, it's actually in three pieces. We're doing an analysis of a single record, and in the end, we're doing an analysis of all our records together. Now, that may be the intent of what's said, but I don't get a sense that that is actually what's being said. You should be aware by now that I'm really not in the school of thought that says that we should weight our records based on the process map. Now, remember the process map. It's been a while since we talked about the process map. Found in the front of Evidence Explained and in the back of the Genealogical Standard. And what we're today talking about is this little white block down here called analysis. In this analysis, we are in fact bringing together all the pieces of the evidence analysis process map. That's the whole purpose of our analysis, is to examine a record, make determinations about, is it original, is it derivative, is it authored, make decisions about, is it primary, is it secondary, is the information primary, is it secondary, or do we not know? And is the evidence direct, indirect, or negative? And we've covered all those things in past videos. So you may have to go back and look at those just to get a refresh. And there's this concept of, well, based on all that information and us attaching these tags to each record. And before I go much further, recognize that it's possible for a single record to both contain direct evidence and indirect evidence. It's possible for the information in a single record to be both primary, secondary, and undetermined, meaning the pieces of it. You could have it be primary, in other words, the person was in fact there, saw it happen. But in their description of what they saw happen, they're saying other people said. And if you know who those other people are, it might be secondary. If you don't know who those other people are, it may be undetermined. And it's possible for you to have an original record that contains information from a from a derivative record. So you want to be very careful. And that's what's important in your first analysis. And I'll call it now first analysis, or another word might be my record analysis versus my records analysis. So when I look at an individual record, what I personally am most interested in is this record credible? Can I believe this record? Is this record such that if I were an idiot, I would allow it to stand by itself? And I would have, quote, truth. No record stands by itself. And I'm not an idiot. So when I look at a record, I have this sense, based on my experience, based on my practice, based on my years, of, is it credible? It's possible for a source to be original and not credible. It's possible for a source to be derivative and credible. So recognize that the meanings of all these words as they apply to your analysis actually doesn't mean much from the perspective of it being in isolation. So what I'm interested in my initial analysis is, based on what I know so far, is this record credible? Based on what I've done so far, does this record lead me to other records that I somehow have forgotten to collect? Are there additional records based on this record that I have not collected? In other words, where are the precursors? What are the successors? Are there precursors or successors that I have not collected as part of my exhaustive search that I should collect before I correlate all this information together, before I compare all these records together? So my purpose in examining a single record is it credible? Can I believe it? Or what portion do I believe? What portion do I not believe? In isolation. And also the question of, what have I forgotten? Is there something else that I should get to add to my analysis? In other words, where does this record lead me, and have I gone there? If I haven't gone there yet, then possibly I should go there before I do anything else. So I want that record to stand by itself in this single analysis. Now, am I going to base my proof on this single record? Very unlikely. So in the genealogical proof in chapter 5, there are tests of analysis, and you can check out chapter 5, which talks about analysis and correlation, to get a more in-depth look at this. And basically the tests of analysis are from their perspective, from Tom Jones' perspective, is that there are two analytical tests that are fundamental: determining whether the source is an authored work, or original, or derivative. And honestly, I don't care. In the final analysis, in the initial analysis I might, but in the final analysis I really probably won't care. And determining, if we can, whether each relevant information item is primary or secondary. Because I believe that records can lie, and they often do, for a variety of different reasons. I'm more interested at this point in determining, in my mind, whether the record is credible. Regardless of the decision that I come to in the analysis of this record is not going to be discarded. In other words, if I go and say, well, this is just crap, that doesn't mean I'm going to throw the record away. And the reason for that is what we'll talk about down the road in regards to conflict. So we're not going to throw any records away. We're just going to try to decide, is the record credible? Maybe, maybe not. It doesn't really change anything at this point. then the issue is there other records that I should be getting? Now, there are pieces in the when we get into the next phase of this, which is correlation, where it's going to be important to know whether you've got a primary record or not. It's going to be important to know whether you have put all the tags on your record in regards to the source tags, the information tags, and the evidence tags. You still have to do that. But the issue is, at this point in the process, does it make any difference in your evaluation of the record? And my position is that it doesn't. And here's why. Let's move into the next piece. And that piece is the correlation. So I now have, through my exhaustive search, have brought all these records together. I've taken a look at every record. I've laid them out on my dining room table or my desktop. I've got a 3-screen desktop, so it's easy to do that. And then I'm going to look at all of them as a neighborhood. And do they all match? Do they all say the same thing? Do they all agree? And that's really the purpose of my comparison and correlation. Have I, through my comparison and correlation, identified any conflict, which I will have to resolve in the future? So the issue becomes one of, if I do have conflict, I need to know those tags, because now in all these records, which one is the original record? Now the reason I want to know the original record, because in my final proof, I want to use the original record, not a derivative record, not an author record. I always want to use the original record. So as part of my initial analysis, I have identified whether a record is original or not. In the analysis, it doesn't make much difference. In the comparison, it does. Because what I'm trying to identify in that comparison is conflict and what record I'm going to use in my proof. It might be records, but what record I'm going to use in my proof. So in the event that I don't have any conflict and everything agrees with everything, and I've done an exhaustive search, so I have brought together all the records, then I'm going to do an analysis of that comparison, that correlation, to determine what these records' contribution is to my genealogical proof. And that's where the final analysis comes together, because I'm analyzing these records all together on the playing field rather than just analyzing the record in isolation. Now, several things can happen here. One, I can be satisfied that I'm on the right track, my hypothesis has been met, I can now move forward, I have no conflict, it's time to sit down and put it all together. Or I identify conflict and then I have to go and resolve that conflict. Or it may be that I can't resolve the conflict, but I have to identify the conflict. In other words, in this portion, you're not going to take things that conflict with what you believe to be the case and throw them away. You can't do that. Because down the road, after you've published, someone will find that conflict and they'll hammer you with it. So you want to make sure that you, in fact, lay all the issues out on the table, attempt to resolve them, and that's the next element. But in this element, we only have the 3 pieces. We look at that record, we tag it appropriately. I don't care about weighting and all that kind of stuff in the initial analysis, because it isn't until the comparison or the correlation that those tags actually make any difference. Because in that analysis, I'm not identifying what record I'm going to base my proof on. In that comparison, in that correlation, I'm going to attempt to identify the original record. And that's what I'm going to use in my proof. It actually is that this can be the simplest part of our process, or this can be the least simple part of our process as a function of how we look at it, how we deal with it. You can make it tough, you can make it simple. If everything is in agreement, we don't have a problem. If everything is not in agreement, we have to go to the next element and work on that. In my mind, the hardest part of doing the genealogical proof standard is ensuring that I have in fact had an exhaustive search, that when I do this comparison correlation piece, I in fact have all the records that I need in order to come up with the answer that will stand the test of time, that will stand scrutiny. Because if my exhaustive search has not been exhaustive enough, I don't have enough records on my playing field to be sure that I have in fact made sure that there was not conflict. So that's my view of analysis, correlation, comparison, and then further analysis. So for me, it's a three-piece part. I'm sure that you can make the case that it's only a two-piece part, but for me, it's three. For me, I don't really care about weighting things in the initial analysis. What I do care about is the record credible? Does that mean anything in the comparison phase? Maybe not. But in the comparison phase, I care about what the source is. I care about what information is there. I care about what the evidence is in the tags, because I'm looking for the piece that will be of most value to me in my genealogical proof. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Sorry this has taken so long, but I had to think about it for a while, because I think part of it is I've been doing it so long that I'm not sure I know how to articulate it, but that I just know what I do. I know when I've done it. So I mean, it's tough for me sometimes to articulate what it is I actually mean. So I think there's got some notes. See if I missed anything. Yeah, I did miss something. So what happens if you have this idea about how things should go? You do the analysis and you do the correlation and comparison, and all of a sudden there's now more than one way to look at it. So this means you have to make some modification. So it's possible that from your comparison and correlation, you come up with a different idea as to where you're going to go, where it's going to end up. And that is part of the process. So don't be surprised if that happens, that you have a hypothesis and you're marching in that direction, and as you analyze those individual records, you think you're in that path. But when you sit down and compare them all together, you're not in that path anymore. Or there's more than one path, and then we move to the next element. Recognize that two paths don't necessarily mean conflict. They could just be two paths. And it may be that you have to explore each one of those paths to find out which one is the more appropriate path. Paths don't always conflict. There are many ways to get from one place to another. They may be in parallel, but not connected, if that makes any sense. So, this has been Craig. This has been Just Genealogy, where we're moving down the road towards finishing up Genealogical Proof Standard. And the next thing we're going to talk about is resolving conflict. And I look forward to that. I'm always interested in resolving conflict. If you have any questions, please put them down below. Again, tell your friends, subscribe, hit the button, the bell, whatever. We're getting close to 500 people, and I'm probably going to throw a party when we get to 500 people, or take a day off. I can't decide which yet. Y'all have a good day, and I'll see you tomorrow.